My name is Shane Hurd. Welcome to the All the Strange web conference. I want to thank Rogue Planet TV for inviting me to speak. This is a topic I find important and interesting. Hopefully you do too. Unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAP, is the new term used to describe what was formerly referred to as unidentified flying objects. Well, why the change? Well, the United States Air Force first coined the term unidentified flying object in 1953. Excuse me. Its initial definition was any airborne object which by performance, aerodynamic characteristics, or unusual features does not conform to any presently known aircraft or missile type, of which cannot be positively identified as a familiar object. Simply put, an object in the sky that the viewer could not identify. Now, this is a rather clinical definition that the U.S. Air Force put together to allow them to express terminology that could be used to properly categorize, characterize, and otherwise organize those reports to be made available to the public. But over the years, that definition has been lost, and a new unscientific context was created. The term UFO soon became synonymous with flying saucer or aliens, which ironically would be identified. This misnomer can be contributed to the topic becoming considered unscientific and ridiculed not only in scientific, government, and military circles, but also with the media and the public in general. So, serious people and organizations look for a better term that would be more representative of what is being reported and seen and less loaded with that pejorative connotation that I already mentioned. Now, while most UAP sightings can be attributed to misidentification of known phenomena, there are many cases that cannot. And in fact, according to the Battelle Institute's Project Blue Book Special Report number 14, out of, I think, 3,201 cases, on average, 21.5% cases were attributed to unknowns. And that's different than not enough information, which was another category of 11 to 17%, I think, somewhere in there. But the point is that for unknowns, they had enough data to make sure that they could not identify it with some prosaic explanation. It, in fact, was a true unknown. So 21.5%. Now, I should briefly share the fact that I am an investigator for MUFON, and it's something I would highly recommend for you. And perhaps like you, I began to move from merely consuming UFO information motivated by curiosity and entertainment to something more. And there's nothing wrong with entertainment or that curiosity, but I felt compelled to do more. Once I really learned what was going on, I wanted to participate. I wanted to engage or even contribute in some way. So I looked for a way to do so that would match my ability and circumstances, because ufology is like a smorgasbord. There are just so many different facets to it. You could never do justice to all of it. So I at least for myself, I found I wanted to pick a lane and stick in that lane and become proficient at that. And I've been in the civil engineering and geographic information technology fields for 20 years. My career has been spent in corporate and government organizations. I'm a certified public manager. So I thrive in large, structured, policy-driven, and goal-oriented environments. So I look for an organization or an organized effort, basically, to study UAP. And that appealed to me. And I thought that would be my best chance to be successful and be able to contribute. And there's a few different organizations one could join, but the one that stood out to me was the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON. Just a brief history on MUFON. It was formed in 1969, and it is hailed as the largest UFO-related investigation organization in the world. It's an international organization structured similar to a franchise. You have, even though it's nonprofit, it's comprised of like a national and international leadership group, and then individual chapters in those regions carry out investigative work, because UFO investigation is very geographic centric. Where did this happen? When did it happen? Those are the starting points for any investigation. And I'll just say, while no organization is perfect, MUFON, in my experience, has been fantastic, and I highly recommend it. In fact, a little bit about my background is that I belong to the Phoenix chapter of Arizona MUFON. And in fact, I was recently appointed Arizona MUFON Assistant State Director. And the leadership comprised of Jim Mann as State Director, Stacy Wright as Assistant Director, and Dennis Fairmouth as State Chief Investigator has been absolutely stellar. Jim recently retired from Arizona State Director, although he's still Director of Phoenix MUFON. But that led to Stacy being appointed State Director and myself Assistant Director. Now, just a note, the Phoenix chapter even received the first ever Chapter of the Year award in 2017. And the leadership, organization, and support given to me by this team has helped me grow and given me an opportunity to live out my dream. And it's my hope to continue this stellar leadership along with Stacy, Jim, and Dennis. Now, the process for becoming an investigator is very reasonable and affordable. You must first become a MUFON member. You purchase a training manual. You take courses on MUFON University. You take an examination, and upon passing that, you also have to pass a background check. And finally, you mentor with an experienced investigator for a period of time. And then your own case assignments begin. And I would just say, if you're worried about it, you are never alone. Each case, when you've investigated, you submit it to the chief investigator, Dennis, who also, by the way, is an excellent photo analyst. And he reviews the case and provides any feedback or direction to you. There's the support and assistance by the director, the assistant director, or even other field investigators are glad to help. There's just a tremendous amount of support. And along with that, there's camaraderie and a social element. Has been a pure pleasure for me. It's even opened doors for me to be associated with many of the top researchers in the field. So again, if this sounds something like you're interested and that's a good fit for you, I strongly encourage you to do it. Now, I've been an investigator first for about 4 years. I've completed about 80 cases, and the majority of these cases have ranged from less obvious to very obvious misidentifications, a couple of hoaxes, a number of abduction cases, and several true unknowns. So while I still have a lot to learn and experience, I have had a diverse array of case evidence to follow. And so that's what I want to talk a little bit about, is that case evidence. What are the forms of evidence that provide data and information that will help yield an identification of a UAP, or to help eliminate the prosaic explanations in a typical investigation? Let's consider a few. And I think these are kind of the three pillars of an investigation. And so let's talk first about eyewitness accounts. And I know some people have difficulty in accepting an eyewitness account without additional proof, and that's that's a legitimate concern. However, witness credibility is a factor in investigating a case. And there are very credible people, and there are some less than credible people. You have to tease that out in your investigation. However, let me give you some examples of types of individuals that do make credible witnesses. And let me just say again, the eyewitness account is a pillar of the investigation. You can't do anything without it. because if you have a photo or a video and that's all you got, no story whatsoever, all it is a photo or a video. There's no investigative value to it all on its own. And I'll talk more about that later. But so eyewitness account, start there. It's very important. So police officers, those are persons who have been highly trained, certified, engaged in continuous training. They're constantly monitored for physical and mental health in the performance of their duties. They're placed in life and death situations on a daily basis. They're constantly required to make observations and make the correct decision under pressure, to exercise good judgment, and to be very aware of their surroundings, including the behavior of people around them. So though they're not trained as scientists and engineers, they must be among one of the most credible and skilled observers there are. Now, pilots, whether they be military, commercial, or private, they're also particularly credible eyewitnesses when it comes to UAP. In fact, since aircraft, flight dynamics, flight operations, takeoff, landing, navigation, meteorological conditions are all their business, it's their life. And those things may help them be the best eyewitnesses of UAP. And can you imagine being a pilot, having the lives of hundreds of people in your care, all dependent on your skills and knowledge? And can you imagine what they've seen in the skies over the thousands of hours and millions of miles of flight? Well, it's been estimated that not even 10% of UAP sightings have been reported due to the ridicule and persecution that would come upon them if they indeed report UAP. That's particularly true of pilots. I'm going to refer to a case later, Japan Airlines flight, I think 1628, happened in 1986. And it's a good example of this, and I'll talk more about that later. But scientists, engineers, and technicians are also good eyewitnesses, since they have in fact been trained in observation techniques, quantitative and qualitative analysis, and data collection and review of that data. And it all comes under the umbrella of the scientific method. And so they have to be among the most credible witnesses as well. They have the critical eye to try and make a determination of what it is that they're seeing. However, they are disincentivized to do so by the same ridicule and persecution that pilots experience as well. Government officials, they also make credible witnesses. And you're probably going, huh? Well, it's not due to their technical acumen, but it's rather because they are at such a high risk of ridicule, persecution, and even the loss of their career by making such a report. So if they are brave enough to make a report at such risk, you can be sure that they are sincere in their report. They're not hoaxing. However, they still could be wrong. They could be mistaken. But certainly they're not making a glib report. They likely weigh the heavy consequences that could come their way before making any report. Military personnel, they too are credible eyewitnesses because of the same reasons police officers, pilots, scientists, engineers, and technicians, because each of those professions are within the military. And even non-technical military members are well trained in observation. They too must exercise good judgment and soundness of mind. Moreover, they are quite likely to observe UAP in the execution of their military duties. UAP seem to be very interested in all things military, including our nuclear activities. So the incidence of seeing them is very high. I'll talk a little bit later about a recent case in which that has been proven true. Many military members do see UAP, and the Navy has admitted that it happens on a regular basis. Now, the second pillar I'm going to talk about is trace evidence. And trace evidence is more rare because it usually means that there is an effect by the UAP on our physical environment in some way. So like a crash or a landing or something like that. And those are much more rare reports, but it's extremely valuable evidence because it allows for the collection, analysis, and the making of data-driven conclusions about a UAP event, which is the most important thing we can do. In other words, it's physical evidence or proof that at a minimum, something physical did occur. This is something that can be utilized in the scientific process. It can be measured, it can be aggregated, and otherwise used to at least develop a hypothesis. And trace evidence can come in many forms. So, for example, it might be chemical residue, radiological residue, or electrical effects on the environment, or it may be, damage to plants, animals, and even human beings. So it can be a very powerful form of evidence should you have the good fortune to have it to utilize in your investigation. Now, the third pillar is photographic, video, and I'll even include radar evidence there. Now, I would love to be able to say that, really good photo, video could provide not just evidence, but proof of UAP. But the sad fact is, no way. A single photo, video is just not going to do it. And the reason is because these forms of evidence are easily falsified. In fact, more recently, with the invention and availability of computer software, an individual can create some pretty convincing CGI imagery that to the untrained eye may appear valid. Although with scientific scrutiny, these things can be identified as fraudulent. But sadly today, many people will see a photo or a video on platforms like YouTube and either don't have the time or the skill set necessary to research and determine the validity of that photo or video. And even when you do, it can be very difficult to track down the source and to get the backstory on that video or photo, which are critical. So the internet is just chock full of photos and videos and websites that contain UAP that are complete fabrications. So I just say researcher and investigator, beware. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is not true. So now finally, I do want to say a little bit about radar imagery. I consider it a very good form of evidence, largely because the imagery comes from the equivalent of a scientific instrument or a network of those instruments. And it is in a closed environment and network. It's maintained, it's patched, it's upgraded, all of those things. And it requires a high degree of technical skill and training to operate these systems. So in other words, it is not prone to hoax. Now, is it prone to misinterpretations? Well, there is a possibility of misinterpreting the data, but the conditions for that are pretty well known. Things such as temperature inversions, but a skilled and experienced operator is quite adept at distinguishing between false images, sweeps, pings, and the like. So I consider it very strong evidence. And, it's in the hands of the military and the government and so forth. So, I think the likelihood of hoax is pretty slim in those cases. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a strong case involving the confirmation of a UAP by radar imagery is the November 17th, 1986, Japan Airlines Flight 1628 encounter over Anchorage, Alaska. And it's an amazing encounter of a Boeing 747 cargo plane and a UAP the size of an aircraft carrier for well over 50 minutes. And the whole affair played out on radar. And this is a terrific example of the value of radar imagery as evidence for a UAP case. And I strongly recommend, if you're not familiar with the case, check it out. It's really good. Now, we can not summarily dismiss all photo, video, and radar imagery. In fact, I think if we ever do get a confirmation or a disclosure or an identification of UAP and its source, it's going to involve that kind of imagery. It'll play a part in the authentication. It won't be the only piece, but it will be a significant part of it. So it'll just depend on the circumstances and who is presenting it as evidence. Now, when combined with other forms of evidence, such as the eyewitness testimony, trace evidence, video and photographic imagery, and even audio files, a very solid investigation, incredible and high quality conclusion can be made. So, based on the evidence so far, the conclusion I have come to is this: that while there may be no proof, at least in the public, there is a preponderance of evidence to suggest something very real is happening. And I suspect that if you have not already come to that conclusion yourself, you will as you progress through your personal research and you consider the evidence of UAP. Now, I will also add that UAP is such an enigma that there is no certainty of what the big picture may be at this point in time. So, in other words, we're certain about some details and some evidence, but it's not enough to really say we think this is a big thing going on. I mean, there are many theories, but at this point, what we're left with is no choice but to follow the evidence wherever that leads. I think that's critically important. So how do we draw conclusions from this kind of evidence? Well, one of the things I think we must do first is examine our own bias. And everybody has bias, no doubt about it. But it is also possible to set that aside if you focus on that. So let me just share a bit of personal history with you, because it shapes my point of view and how I apply it to my investigation of UAP. So I spent the majority of my life as an avid Bible student. I was a member of a Christian religious organization. I was a leader in that organization, and I learned how to think critically, how to write, how to reason with people, and how to speak publicly. And these have been very useful skill sets that I've utilized, in general as a husband, a father, even as in my career, and even applied here to ufology. And I'm very grateful for that training. However, I'm no longer a member of any Christian religion now. And as a result, my perspective has changed in one principal way. And that is the concept of belief. Now, essentially, belief is the acceptance of something as true without the proof. Okay? Belief is a necessary function of human intelligence and logic. I mean, it's part of the natural process of learning. So, for example, in religion, we believe in the existence of a God. In science, we believe in our scientific theories until proven as fact. In business, we often believe in management theories or principles. So belief is necessary because it is the bridge between gaps in our knowledge, in what we thought true and what is later proven true. So it moves us along, it moves us forward, it helps us to continue to learn, and we gain motivation and emotional support from it. So belief is very important, necessary, and valid. However, there is a danger with belief. Human beings tend to allow belief to rise to the level of truth or proof when it's not warranted. And this can be problematic and even dangerous. So humans can allow belief to be superior to proof. Truth is often denied in the face of strongly held beliefs. You may have heard the term cognitive dissonance. It essentially represents the process that we go of rejecting a truth subconsciously or consciously, because subconsciously it conflicts with a treasured belief. And frustratingly, we see this displayed in many facets of life today. Now, I've heard there are 3 stages of truth. First, the fact is that it's ridiculed, then it's violently opposed, and finally is accepted as self-evident. Is that not true with regard to UAP? We are now witnessing the struggle for the acceptance of UAP as a reality. The truth of the reality of UAP is going through these stages. So for 70 years, it's been bitterly ridiculed. People pursuing UFO truths have had their lives ruined in many cases. Secondly, there are cases of violence, be it physical, verbal, political, whatever, towards UFO researchers, abductees, witnesses, and whistleblowers. And then thirdly, more and more people now, including scientists and government officials, law enforcement, the military, and the intelligence community, the public in general, even the media, are beginning to accept UAP as a reality. Well, make no mistake, UAP is a reality, and that is not a mere belief. That is the truth. So you are no doubt aware of the Navy's confirmation of the reality of UAP, such has been reported by the Roosevelt and Nimitz aircraft carrier cases in the news for the last couple of years. And of course, just in the last few weeks, the Navy verified that those videos, in fact, were genuine, unidentified in their terminology. So that is a pretty fascinating development, and one that is quite welcome. So based on that, my viewpoint has changed in this way. I am very careful to separate belief from proof in my mind as I research and investigate the phenomena. I try to have no bias in my approach to an investigation. I really avoid falling into the belief category. And the reason is I don't want to be wrong. It's too important of a topic to take that risk. And in the end, this may be the greatest discovery in the history of mankind. It may even rise to a matter of life and death. So it's so important to carry this out in a very defendable way. Now, there are many people who already believe in the reality of UAP, aliens, and other facets of UAP without proof. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a normal part of the human intellect and is not necessarily wrong, but there are dangers to placing that belief above proof. For example, one can miss out on some really important facts if they're not looking because they think they already know based on their belief. Although I don't criticize true believers because they may have more reason to believe than I. They may have what they consider to be proof. Maybe they saw a flying saucer with their own eyes. Or maybe they have been abducted or contacted. I don't know. I wasn't there. I can't say that they're wrong. And frankly, if any of those things happened to me too, that would make me a believer, or not just a believer, but a knower. So I have to keep myself as neutral as possible on that as well. And the other thing you got to consider too is people who are sometimes called true believers pejoratively, they do invite ridicule from even fellow ufologists because they often demonstrate an unreasonable level of gullibility that damages credibility not only of themselves, but the entire UFO community. And as we've discussed, credibility has always been a hard to come by commodity for the UFO community, especially in view of the general public. And so I think it's a valid concern. And so as a member of the UFO research and investigation community, I think you and I have a responsibility to carry on our work in as an objective and well-balanced way as possible. So the most effective way to manage the credibility, I think, is to follow the evidence. No one can justifiably refute a proven fact. They might try, remember, cognitive dissonance, but not in a justifiable way. Now, if you have a proven fact, I think by all means, stand up and crow, tell the world. The truth needs to be exposed and advertised and put to the forefront. However, when it comes to belief or assumption or theory or some other unproven information, I recommend proceeding more carefully. Openly acknowledge when you're espousing just a theory or an opinion. Follow the evidence and skillfully use it to make your point. Use reason and logic and place the emphasis on the data and that will serve you well. So to conclude, I just wanted to commend you for your interest in and efforts in researching unidentified aerial phenomena, because we need the next generation of researchers to develop. Many of our predecessors are reaching or well past retirement age, and this work needs to continue. We are in exciting times, things that have been happening in ufology that haven't happened in 70 years. So it is a fascinating time to be involved with this. And I hope this presentation will inspire you to reach out and participate. And finally, I'd also just like to announce the release of my first book entitled Unidentified Aerial Phenomena: An Introduction to Investigating UFOs. It will soon be available on Amazon, and I would love to hear what you think about it. I wrote this to help a newly interested person kind of wade through the wheat and the chaff of UFO information that is out there. How does a person get started? Where do you find credible information? How do you even know that it's credible? See, these are important questions that need to be asked, and hopefully this book will help you avoid many of the pitfalls I experienced, the rabbit holes that I unnecessarily went down, and take you from the most direct point from A to B in your research of UFOs. So I hope you find the answers in your own evidence-based UFO investigations. And finally, stay strange.